Alrighty guys, gonna put some of the crank seals and output shaft seals and various things in the bottom end of the RM85. I always put a little tape on the splines of the output shaft, and I always grease the inner lips of the seals. So usually I'll be able to stretch that over the tape, and that just kind of prevents it from cutting the seal if it would want to in any way. Getting this here. Usually I can push these in by hand. They go in fairly easily. And what I'll go do is take a little punch and I'll just tap so it's flush. I'm gonna take myself a square 3/8 punch like this, or I mean extension. So, sounds pretty uniform there. Just getting that in there a little bit more even. It looks pretty good to me. Move on to left side crank seal. It's going to be this one here. That's going to go on the flywheel side. Obviously the spring is going to go to the inside. On these, I'll put grease on the inner lip, and I'll actually put a little bit of crankcase sealer on the outer diameter of the crank seal. Sometimes you'll find that some bikes, it's really loose fitting in the aluminum case, and you know, there is a possibility under weird circumstances that it could blow that crank seal out. Say it backfired really weird or something. A little bit of crankcase sealer never hurts. Just a little bit, you don't have to go excessive. And that's going to be on the outer diameter of it. Always make sure that you grease it very thoroughly though on the inside, so that it's got plenty of lubrication when it first starts up. I always use Mercury or Quicksilver 24C crankcase sealer, or marine grease for seals. I've always done it with that. Just kind of a habit I've had over the years. I was taught by somebody that way, and I just always follow that. So I take a little bit of brake clean off the outer diameter of that seal, and then I already brake cleaned and wiped down the inner portion of the crankcase where the seal is going to ride. So got that all taken care of. And I'll put a little bit of crankcase sealer. This is Permatex Moto Seal, very similar to 3-Bond. And I take a little bit. I just put a little bit on the outer diameter of that seal. And I put that and drive it in. Like I said, just a little bit. And I take it, get it up to there. Here I usually just try to get it started in there square. And like I said, this one's pretty loose fitting, you know, goes in pretty easy. So that's why that little bit of crankcase sealer on there, as long as the surfaces are clean, you know, that'll help seal up the outer diameter of that crank seal. And some guys will cover up the keyway when they go on with it. Usually the keyway's tapered back so that it doesn't ever touch the diameter of the lip, but you could always protect it if you wanted. I'm not in this case. Here I'm just running it flush with the crankcase. And that looks awesome. I'll get you guys in here for the close-up so you guys can see what the finished product looks like. I always wipe it off a little bit. So there it is, the seal. Looks real nice and uniform. A little bit of crankcase sealer on the outside, like I said. Working on the right side crank seal, which is in there by the primary drive. We'll seal Looks like this on one side, like this on the other side. On this particular one, I'm going to put the lip or spring side into the crankcase with the closed face pointing towards the transmission oil. Most of these on bikes are going to be spring on both sides, so it doesn't really matter. For whatever reason, this kit and this particular engine, I'm going to put it in this direction. So there is some guys that are going to say to put it in this way. I'm going with the spring towards the crankcase pressure and vacuum, so that's the way I'm going to put it in there. I'm going to clean this one up a little bit with some brake cleaner, and I'll get some grease on the inner lip of the seal again. Get that all taken care of. Got our crankcase sealer on there. And this one here is going to get square in there, and we'll tap that one down. Got to cover up the Amabond or my Moto seal. Otherwise, it'll start spewing everywhere. So I guess I'll take my punch once again, and I keep calling it a punch, but it's an extension. Snap on. I always check with my finger to see what it feels like. It all feels good. So I like the way that feels and looks. Pretty uniform all the way around. Looks like a job well done there. Collar in that gear. And then you have a washer and a nut. So that all goes on there. Like I said, this one is not keyed, it's splined. So don't have to put anything in the keyway for this one. I don't think I'm gonna. I might put a little bit of sealer where the washer and the nut meet on the end, but should be good as it is. So that's gonna be it for now. We'll continue on putting this together, and then we'll work on the outer seals as we get more of the motor together. Alrighty guys, working on the RM85 bottom end. I'm actually put the top end, cylinder, piston, head, everything on already. I'm not going to bore you with that. I mean, I've done plenty of top ends on the channel. If you guys want to see one done, just go watch another video. Hook the power valve rod up to a little plastic retainer. Actuating like it should. Put a little bit of blue Loctite on all the nuts and the 8-corner nuts on top. Did connect and put on the primary drive gear. That is a washer, like a bevel washer, and then a reverse threaded nut. This is reverse thread, and this is what drives the water pump on this square drive here. This is your power valve actuator. Ran directly off the primary gear on the crank, and that's what uses centrifugal force with the RPM to lift the power valve and open that. You can see there's the collar that goes in the crank seal, and then this gear has its shoulder pointing downward towards that collar. And then you can tighten that up. Like I said, reverse thread, I put a little bit of blue Loctite on those. I also installed the shift drum, shift cam selector there. There's a stud underneath there with a long peg. That's this inner portion here. And then I also hooked up the spring locker for putting tension on the transmission gears. You can see that little spring gets wrapped and tucked in behind the aluminum there, and then this hook goes on. There's actually like a flat washer underneath all of it, and then there's this washer has like a shoulder on it that pilots in the arm, and then this is a 10mm bolt. Little blue Loctite on that one. This retainer goes on in this orientation. It's not going to go on the other way, and it won't go on upside down either, because these recessed areas for these screws to set in will only go on one way. Here's your little spring-loaded dogs for the shifting mechanism. and that sits in there, just pilots over the peg that you use to tighten the lower collar down, and then this retainer plate keeps that from coming out of there. Next, we got to put on the clutch and kicker and idler gear, as well as the shift shaft, and that, you know, that'll conclude the bottom end on this thing. So I'll keep going, and I'll try to record as much as I can for you guys and show you the important stuff. On this shaft here is going to be a washer or spacer shim. It goes on first, and then the clutch basket with its needle roller bearing, and I'll go into more details when we get that portion installed. Working on putting the kicker gear in. You can see this piece here has that little tab on it. That's going to go like this down, and it just covers up the aluminum case so that it doesn't wear into it. And then you have this piece, which is what the Kickstarter locks behind to keep it in its spring state, so it stays sprung, so that it'll return when you kick the machine over. So that goes on, and then there's a little 10mm bolt that I put a little bit of blue Loctite on that one. Usually I'll check them with a ratchet. Plenty tight there. And then this is your kickstart assembly. So this piece here is going to go behind that piece. The spring is going to get wrapped, and there's a hole right over there. So we'll see if, like I said, if I can get that. Alrighty guys, so you're going to have to take this top piece off. Just put the wear plate on, hook your spring in there, and then wind this back and tuck it behind. Then put this piece on with the 10mm bolt. So something just like this. There we go. That'll work better for us. And then this here splined piece only goes on, I thought one way, or only one spline. Maybe it had a different spline size on one. It only goes on one way, but we'll definitely prove that theory later once we kick this thing over, make sure it's all operational. But got that on. There's also a second piece to that assembly, and there's a couple shims on here. So this is a gear here, and it's got shim washers on each side of it. So this one I'll put on later, but there's one on the back side. Pretty self-explanatory. The teeth side is going to go towards the teeth on there. Like I said, that stays kind of freewheeling. And when you kick it over, that'll come out and grab that. So put that washer on, and that'll butt up, you know, the case cover will sit against that. Now we can put the idler gear on, which here I labeled up. So that means the shoulder portion is going to go down, and there's a snap ring and a shim washer that's on top. So we'll go ahead and reset this on there. And that's always, like I said, in constant mesh with that. Put a little bit of lube on there. And then the shim washer. And then our snap ring. Usually I'll find the flat side of the snap ring. Put that down. And I got my snap ring pliers here. Just take that. Stretch it over the top of that. Looks to be good. good there. So that's all hooked in. I said our shifter's in. I'll show you that. See the teeth here? You line that up with the shift mechanism. You can see it's in the middle of the teeth. That is proper. And it also goes over the spring here, goes over the peg. And then it'll just push right in. And your cover keeps this from falling out. So, got that. Next, I'll get the clutch basket. Here's that shim washer. That's going to go on first. Against there. And you got your clutch basket. Like I said, I'll put a little bit of... There's also a needle bearing that goes inside over the shaft. So I'll make sure I get this well lubricated with some engine oil. So I got some engine oil on there. Get that needle bearing lubricated. Plenty good there. Got the shim. Got our clutch basket, and that's got to go on. And then it's got to sit down in there and drive off the idler gear and mesh with the crank gear, which it does. That is good. And we have the inner hub. It also has a spline washer that goes on. Then you have your inner clutch hub with locking washer and nut. You got that on there. This one here, usually you want to replace it if it starts looking like this. You know, it's been unfolded and folded a couple times, but I think there was one spot. So as long as you get the little tab or the groove to go in one of these bosses here, you'll be in good shape. And usually I'll put a little bit of blue Loctite on this nut when I install it. But that is all there is to that portion of the bottom end. It's pretty much finished up. I just gotta get the clutch in there. I'll show you guys that. I'm reusing the clutch that was in it, you know, not putting a new one in this time. And then it's just a cover gasket. And then getting the water pump impeller lined up is a little tricky, along with getting the clutch pusher rod lined up is a little tricky. Putting the clutch pressure plate and springs on. Got the plates all in there. You know, you start with the friction, end with the friction. Steel's in between. Clutch springs go on the outside after the pressure plate's on. Usually you'd want to mark everything so you put it back in the same orientation. This one seems to sit down in all directions, every which way you put it, as long as it sits down nice and square. The clutch pusher is in the middle. That's got to go in from the inside out. There's a little roller bearing in there as well. That goes on the thrust side of it. And then the other end of it will go against the input shaft, I believe, or the nut or whatever that is on the inner clutch basket. And then we'll put our fasteners in. Usually there's a torque spec, a very, very low torque spec, you know, a couple foot-pounds. So you can always torque those up. But I always go with just a wrist snug, real gentle on that. Crisscross them as you tighten them. And then your clutch is on. And then all we got to do is put the cover on with the water pump impeller, line everything up, and we're set to go.